power should be in communities and people and not in politicians. And that's ultimately what voting rights work is about.
You need to have access to the franchise. You need to be able to vote to be able to protect all of your other rights.
And that's why civil rights leaders started with the right to vote, and that's why we continue to work to further their work at the clinic.
So I started the clinic 3 years ago with the idea that we could both train a new generation of lawyers, but also that we could bring some of the greatest innovations from academia into the courts and into the advocacy space. And so I think our work with respect to State Voting Rights Act is a good example of that. The Voting Rights Act, when it was passed in 1965, has been one of the most successful civil rights statutes. It finally brought people of color into the halls of Congress, state legislatures, local communities, and now we are seeing parity between black and white voters in many places across the country. In recent years, however, the Supreme Court has been extremely hostile to voting rights. So even though we do have a Federal Voting Rights Act, there are many places where people of color are left out of democracy and there is no remedy we can bring them under the Federal Voting Rights Act.
State voting rights acts go further than federal law. And so they fill really crucial gaps. And they also come up with, I think, creative ways to try to address voting rights issues that aren't necessarily litigation.
So we work with a coalition of incredible NGOs to educate lawmakers and their staff on the benefits that state voting rights acts can have for minority communities in their state. I personally spend most of my time thinking about how to write state voting rights acts in ways that make sure that the rights will be upheld in court.
And then ultimately, in places where everything else fails, we then file lawsuits to try to make change.
So I'm someone that works on the litigation side of things. The goal of this litigation is to often shift systems that are at-large election systems into something that will give folks a voice and a seat at the table that otherwise would be really hard for them to obtain. Part of what we're doing is just showing them that we're in the fight with them.
We were able to help defend the constitutionality of the Washington Voting Rights Act. And in that case, we wrote an amicus brief. In fact, one of my students wrote an amicus brief, and it was heavily cited in the opinion that upheld the constitutionality of the Washington Voting Rights Act. We are now bringing these cases in New York, and in those cases, we are seeking to both get remedies for our clients, but also to defend the constitutionality of these state VRAs.
The big dots on the map represent direct representation that we've done, so generally litigation. And the smaller dots on the map represent amicus briefs or legislative advocacy. While we don't win every single case or get every single bill passed, I think the other thing that the dots represent is a community that the Harvard Election Law Clinic has said, we hear you too, and has shown them that we're in the fight with them no matter how it goes.
When you think about yourself as being in a lineage of advocates who have fought for the right to vote for 100 years in this country, 250 years, that is just like an incredible feeling as a law student when everything can feel really theoretical and you finally just get to have an impact and see a community have a voice for the first time.